Jonathan Sterling lived a life most people only dreamed of. He was a self-made millionaire in his late 40s, with a thriving real estate empire that spanned cities and towns. His name carried weight wherever he went, and his bank account reflected years of hard work and smart decisions. But beneath the polished suits, luxury cars, and penthouse views lay a man who wasn't as content as everyone assumed. For over 2 decades, Jonathan had been married to Emma, his high school sweetheart. Together, they had built not just a business but a family. Emma was the backbone of their relationship, steady, supportive, and endlessly patient. She managed their household while cheering him on during every milestone of his career. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple. Yet behind closed doors, things weren't so rosy. Over time, Jonathan became distant. Long hours at work turned into late-night meetings, and weekends meant more phone calls than quality time. The spark between them dimmed until it felt like nothing more than an ember struggling to stay alive. Emma tried her best to keep things together. She cooked his favorite meals, planned surprise dates, and reminded him of the dreams they once shared. But no matter what she did, Jonathan seemed unreachable. He told himself it was the stress of running a business. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about work. Something inside him felt restless, a longing for something new, something exciting. That something walked into his life one evening at a charity gala. Her name was Sophia, and she was everything Emma wasn't. Young, bold, and full of energy. With her dazzling smile and confident demeanor, she stood out in the crowded room like a beacon. When their eyes met across the ballroom, Jonathan felt a jolt he hadn't experienced in years. They struck up a conversation, laughing over shared stories and exchanging glances that lingered just a little too long. By the end of the night, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about her. Sophia was different from anyone he'd ever known. She challenged him, made him feel alive again, and reminded him of the man he used to be before responsibility took over. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day, and soon, Jonathan found himself torn between duty and desire. On one side was Emma, the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. On the other was Sophia, representing freedom and adventure. The decision didn't come easily or quickly, but eventually, Jonathan convinced himself that leaving Emma was the right choice. He believed he deserved happiness, even if it came at a cost. So, after weeks of sleepless nights and internal battles, he sat Emma down and told her the truth. It was painful, for both of them, but Jonathan refused to back down. He moved out of their home, leaving behind memories of laughter, love, and shared dreams. As he packed his bags and stepped into a new chapter of his life, Jonathan thought he was making the right decision. Little did he know, this choice would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Life with Sophia started like a dream. She moved into Jonathan's luxurious penthouse, and for the first few months, everything seemed perfect. The city skyline twinkled outside their floor-to-ceiling windows, and their days were filled with laughter, fine dining, and spontaneous adventures. Sophia brought a vibrancy to Jonathan's life that he hadn't felt in years. She introduced him to new hobbies, dragged him to art galleries he'd never bothered visiting, and made sure every moment felt exciting. But as the initial rush of romance began to fade, cracks started showing in their picture-perfect world. Sophia wasn't like Emma. She didn't cook meals or quietly support him from the sidelines. Instead, she thrived on attention, always wanting to be at the center of things. Her energy was intoxicating at first, but over time, it became exhausting. Jonathan noticed how often conversations revolved around her needs and desires. If he suggested spending a quiet evening at home, she pouted and insisted they go out instead. When he talked about work stress, she brushed it off, saying he should enjoy life while he could. What worried Jonathan even more was Sophia's growing interest in his wealth. At first, it was subtle, a designer handbag here, a weekend getaway there. But soon, her requests grew bolder. She wanted expensive gifts, extravagant vacations, and access to his credit cards without question. Jonathan tried to convince himself it was normal. After all, he had money, and she enjoyed the finer things in life. Still, something about it didn't sit right with him. The guilt over leaving Emma also lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. He often found himself thinking about her late at night, when Sofia was asleep beside him. Memories of Emma's gentle smile and unwavering patience haunted him. He remembered how she used to listen intently when he spoke, offering advice without judgment. Sofia, on the other hand, rarely asked about his feelings unless it benefited her somehow. The contrast between the two women weighed heavily on him. To distract himself, Jonathan threw himself into work. He poured hours into expanding his real estate portfolio, attending meetings, and closing deals. For a while, the business helped numb the unease creeping into his mind, but no matter how hard he worked, the emptiness inside him remained. It gnawed at him during quiet moments, reminding him of the choices he'd made. One evening, after a particularly long day, Jonathan came home to find Sofia lounging on the couch scrolling through social media. She barely looked up when he walked in. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. Without looking away from her phone, she replied, "Fine. Yours?" Her indifference stung. Jonathan realized then just how distant they had become. They lived together, shared a bed, and went places as a couple, yet they hardly connected anymore. He missed the deep conversations he used to have with Emma, the ones where they stayed up late talking about their hopes and fears. With Sofia, everything felt surface level, fleeting. Despite these doubts, Jonathan told himself he had made the right decision. Leaving Emma had been painful, yes, but staying would have meant settling for a life that no longer excited him. Or so he kept telling himself. Deep down, though, he wondered if excitement was enough to sustain a relationship, or if he had sacrificed something far more valuable for the sake of temporary happiness. As weeks turned into months, Jonathan found himself increasingly restless. His penthouse, once a symbol of success and freedom, now felt suffocating. The glittering lights of the city outside his window seemed colder somehow, mirroring the emptiness within him. He couldn't help but wonder if he had traded one kind of loneliness for another, and whether this new chapter of his life would ever truly feel fulfilling. Years slipped by, and Jonathan's life settled into a rhythm that felt more monotonous than magical. The initial thrill of his relationship with Sofia had faded, leaving behind a sense of emptiness he couldn't quite shake. Work became his refuge, a place where he could focus on something tangible rather than the growing void in his personal life. But even his business ventures, once a source of pride and excitement, started to feel like just another routine. One crisp autumn morning, Jonathan decided to take a break from the city's chaos and visit one of his properties in a small coastal town. He hadn't been there in years, but the serene atmosphere and salty breeze always helped clear his mind. After inspecting the property, a charming seaside cottage, he drove into town to grab a cup of coffee at a local cafe. It was a quaint little spot with mismatched chairs, shelves lined with books, and the smell of freshly baked pastries wafting through the air. As he waited for his order, Jonathan heard laughter erupt from a nearby table. It wasn't loud or obnoxious. It was warm and infectious, the kind that made you want to smile without knowing why. Curious, he glanced over and froze. 4 children, quadruplets, unmistakably identical, sat giggling together, their faces glowing with mischief and joy. They were around 8 or 9 years old, with bright blue eyes, dimpled smiles, and an undeniable confidence in the way they carried themselves. But what caught Jonathan's attention most was how much they looked like him. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. The resemblance was uncanny. The same sharp jawline, the same tousled hair, even the same slight tilt of their heads when they laughed. His heart began to race as he stared, unable to look away. Who were these children? And why did they remind him so strongly of himself? Their mother sat beside them, quietly sipping her tea while keeping a watchful eye on the lively group. She looked tired but content, her face softening whenever she glanced at her kids. Something about her demeanor struck Jonathan as familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. Before he could stop himself, he stepped closer, his curiosity outweighing any hesitation. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. The woman looked up, startled but polite. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but do we know each other? I feel like I've seen you somewhere before." The woman blinked, clearly taken aback by the question. Then her gaze shifted to the children, who were now watching the exchange with wide-eyed curiosity. For a brief second, Jonathan thought he saw panic flicker across her face, but it disappeared almost instantly. She forced a smile and shook her head. "I don't think so," she replied softly. "We might have crossed paths once, though. This is a small town." Jonathan nodded slowly, unsure whether to believe her answer. There was something guarded in her tone, something that hinted at a story she wasn't ready to share. Still, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. These children weren't just vaguely familiar. They were eerily similar to him in ways that defied coincidence. He thanked her and returned to his seat, his mind racing. Could it be possible? Had his past somehow caught up with him in this quiet little corner of the world? As he sipped his coffee, glancing occasionally at the cheerful family, Jonathan realized this chance encounter might change everything he thought he knew about his life. The encounter at the cafe lingered in Jonathan's mind long after he left the small coastal town. He couldn't stop thinking about the Quadruplets, their laughter, their striking resemblance to him, and the way their mother had hesitated when he asked if they'd met before. It was as though fate had placed them in his path for a reason, and no matter how hard he tried to dismiss it, the thought of them wouldn't leave him alone. A week later, unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Jonathan returned to the town. This time, he didn't go straight to the cafe. Instead, he drove slowly through the streets, scanning for any sign of the woman or her children. Eventually, he spotted her outside a modest house on the edge of town. She was kneeling in the garden, helping one of the kids plant flowers while the others played nearby. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan parked his car and approached cautiously. "Hi," he said, trying to sound casual despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. The woman looked up, clearly surprised to see him again. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." She stood up, brushing dirt off her hands, and gave him a polite but guarded smile. "No, not at all. Is everything okay?" Jonathan hesitated, unsure how to phrase what he wanted to say. I keep thinking about our conversation last week, about the kids." He paused, glancing at the 4 children who were now watching him curiously. "They look so much like me. I can't help but wonder if we've crossed paths before. Maybe years ago." The woman's expression shifted slightly, her smile faltering. For a moment, she didn't respond, and Jonathan braced himself for her to shut him down completely. But then she sighed softly, her shoulders sagging as though she'd been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "Yes," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did meet once, a long time ago." Relief and something akin to dread washed over Jonathan. "When? Where?" he asked, his tone urgent but gentle. Clara, as she introduced herself, explained haltingly that they had encountered each other during one of his property inspections in the area. At the time, she had been working part-time at a local bed and breakfast where Jonathan stayed briefly. Their interaction had been fleeting. A polite conversation here, a shared laugh there, but it had left an impression on both of them. They'd exchanged numbers casually, agreeing to stay in touch, but life got in the way, and they never followed up. "It wasn't serious," Clara added quickly, perhaps sensing his confusion. "Just one night. Nothing more." Her words hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. One night. That was all it took to create 4 lives. 4 beautiful, lively children who carried pieces of him in their smiles, their mannerisms, their very essence. He felt a surge of guilt mixed with awe as he looked at them again, realizing how much he had missed. "I had no idea," he murmured, running a hand through his hair. "You never told me." Clara's eyes softened, tinged with sadness. "How could I? You were gone by the time I realized I was pregnant. And honestly, I wasn't sure you'd want to know. You have your own life, your own responsibilities." Her honesty stung, but Jonathan couldn't argue with her reasoning. He had walked away from that chapter of his life without looking back, just as he had walked away from Emma. Now, standing face to face with the consequences of his actions, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "I want to know now," he said firmly, meeting her gaze. "They're my children, aren't they?" Clara nodded slowly, confirming what he already suspected. "Yes," she whispered. "They are." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the children laughing filled the silence, grounding Jonathan in the reality of the situation. These weren't just strangers who happened to look like him. They were his flesh and blood, a part of him he hadn't even known existed until now. As the enormity of this revelation settled over him, Jonathan realized his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. The drive back home after meeting Clara and the quadruplets felt like a blur. Jonathan's mind raced with questions, emotions, and memories he hadn't thought about in years. How could he have been so oblivious? How had he missed the signs, or worse, failed to even consider the possibility that his actions might have consequences beyond himself? The image of those 4 children kept flashing in his mind. Their bright eyes, their laughter, the way they moved with such boundless energy. They were his children. And yet, until now, they had existed entirely outside his world. Once home, Jonathan found it impossible to focus on anything else. Work emails piled up unread. Sophia complained about his distracted demeanor, but none of it mattered. All he could think about was the family he had unknowingly created, and the life they had built without him. Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had let them down before he'd even known they existed. Determined to make things right, Jonathan reached out to Clara again. This time, he didn't mince words. "I want to be part of their lives," he told her over the phone, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "They deserve to know who I am, and I need to know them." Clara hesitated, her tone cautious but not unkind. "Jonathan, this isn't just about you," she said gently. "These kids, they're my whole world. I've raised them alone for years. If you're serious about being involved, then you need to prove it. Not just today or tomorrow, but for the long haul." Her words struck a chord deep within him. She was right. This wasn't about fixing things with grand gestures or empty promises. It was about earning trust, both hers and theirs. For the first time in years, Jonathan realized that real relationships required patience, effort, and consistency, something he hadn't exactly excelled at in the past. To confirm what they both already suspected, Jonathan arranged for paternity tests. When the results came back positive, there was no denying the truth. The quadruplets were indeed his biological children. Holding the official document in his hands, Jonathan felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. These weren't just test results. They represented 4 young lives who deserved love, support, and guidance from the man who helped bring them into the world. With Clara's blessing, Jonathan began visiting regularly. At first, the children were shy around him, unsure of how to interact with this stranger who claimed to be their father. But Jonathan didn't push. Instead, he showed up consistently, bringing small gifts, a soccer ball, art supplies, board games, and spending time simply getting to know them. He played catch in the backyard, helped them build puzzles, and listened intently as they chattered excitedly about school, friends, and their dreams for the future. Slowly but surely, the ice began to melt. One afternoon, during a particularly lively game of tag, one of the boys accidentally tripped and scraped his knee. Without hesitation, Jonathan scooped him up, cleaned the wound, and applied a colorful bandage. As he ruffled the boy's hair reassuringly, he noticed something remarkable. The child smiled at him. Not a polite, reserved smile, but a genuine, trusting one. It was a tiny moment, but it meant everything. Each visit deepened their bond, and Jonathan found himself looking forward to these trips more than anything else. Watching the quadruplets laugh, argue, and support each other reminded him of the joy and chaos of family life, something he had taken for granted when he walked away from Emma all those years ago. With every shared moment, he grew more determined to be the father they needed, even if it meant confronting the mistakes he'd made along the way. As weeks turned into months, Jonathan began to see glimpses of himself in the children, not just in their appearance, but in their personalities. There was the adventurous one who always wanted to climb higher, the thoughtful one who asked endless questions, the artistic one sketching pictures in the corner, and the jokester who could lighten any mood with a silly face. Seeing pieces of himself reflected in them filled him with pride, but also humility. He realized that being a parent wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, day after day, and doing your best. Through it all, Clara remained supportive but firm, reminding him that building trust takes time. Her strength and resilience inspired him, and though their relationship stayed strictly focused on co-parenting, Jonathan couldn't help but admire the woman who had raised 4 incredible children on her own. She had given them stability, love, and values that shone brightly in everything they did. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt like he was truly living, not just existing. The guilt over his past decisions still lingered. As Jonathan grew closer to his quadruplets, he found himself reflecting more and more on the choices that had led him here. The guilt over leaving Emma still lingered like an old wound that refused to fully heal. He often wondered how she was doing, whether she had moved on, found happiness, or if his betrayal continued to haunt her as it did him. One quiet evening, after tucking the kids into bed during one of his visits, Jonathan sat alone in his car outside Clara's house. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled through old contacts, stopping at Emma's name. It had been years since they last spoke. Their divorce had been messy, filled with anger, hurt, and regret. After walking away from their marriage, Jonathan convinced himself it was better not to look back, to let Emma rebuild her life without interference from him. But now, with everything changing so rapidly, he realized he owed her more than silence. He needed closure, not just for himself, but for the sake of understanding the full impact of his actions. Summoning every ounce of courage, he sent a simple text. "Hi, Emma. It's Jonathan. I know it's been a long time, but I'd like to talk if you're open to it." To his surprise, she replied within minutes. Her message was brief but polite. "Okay, when?" They agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a neutral place where neither of them would feel too exposed. On the day of their meeting, Jonathan arrived early, his stomach tied in knots. Memories of their life together flooded his mind. The cozy dinners, late-night conversations, and shared dreams that once seemed unbreakable. Seeing Emma walk through the door brought all those emotions rushing back. She looked different, older, wiser, but there was still a familiar warmth in her eyes that made him ache with nostalgia. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Jonathan said softly as she took a seat across from him. Emma nodded, her expression calm but guarded. "You said you wanted to talk. So, talk." For a moment, Jonathan struggled to find the right words. How do you apologize for something that can't be undone? Finally, he began haltingly, explaining everything. The children, his meetings with Clara, the whirlwind of emotions he'd been grappling with. He admitted how much he regretted leaving her, how blind he had been to what truly mattered. "I thought I was chasing happiness," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But instead, I lost the person who made me happiest." Emma listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When he finished, she sighed deeply before speaking. "Jonathan, I won't lie. I hated you for a long time after we split. You left me when I needed you most, and it broke me. But eventually, I realized holding on to that anger wasn't helping anyone. I had to move forward, for myself." Her honesty hit him like a punch to the chest. He deserved every word, yet hearing them aloud stung more than he expected. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'll never forgive myself for hurting you." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small, resigned smile. "Maybe you don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe you've changed enough that it doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done." The conversation shifted as Emma opened up about her own struggles after the divorce. Money had been tight, and loneliness had weighed heavily on her. Yet despite the hardships, she had rebuilt her life piece by piece, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Listening to her story humbled Jonathan even further. She had faced adversity head-on, while he had run from his responsibilities. Before parting ways, Emma offered some unexpected advice. "Be there for those kids, Jonathan. They need you, even if they don't realize it yet. And maybe try being kinder to yourself too. You're human, after all." Her words stayed with him long after their meeting ended. For the first time in years, Jonathan allowed himself to acknowledge the pain he had caused, not just to Emma, but to everyone he had wronged along the way. Meeting her again didn't erase his mistakes, but it gave him clarity. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a future worth remembering. With renewed determination, Jonathan threw himself into being the best father he could be. Each visit with the Quadruplets became a chance to rewrite his story, not just for them, but for himself. Jonathan's transformation didn't happen overnight, but with each passing month, he became more present, not just physically, but emotionally. The Quadruplets, Liam, Mia, Ava, and Noah, were no longer strangers to him. They were his children, and he was determined to make up for lost time. He learned their quirks, celebrated their victories, and comforted them through their struggles. Whether it was helping Liam perfect his soccer skills, encouraging Mia's love for science experiments, or sitting patiently while Ava painted yet another masterpiece, Jonathan poured his heart into being the father they deserved. Clara noticed the change in him too. At first, she had been cautious, wary of letting him into their lives after years of raising the kids alone. But as weeks turned into months, her skepticism softened. She saw how much effort Jonathan put into building a relationship with the children, and with her. Though their dynamic remained focused on co-parenting, there was a newfound respect between them. Clara appreciated his consistency, and Jonathan admired her resilience. Together, they created a stable environment where the kids could thrive. But Jonathan's journey wasn't just about reconnecting with his biological family. It was also about healing old wounds. After his meeting with Emma, he made a conscious effort to stay in touch. Their conversations started awkwardly, filled with long pauses and guarded words, but over time, they found a rhythm. Emma never suggested reconciliation, nor did Jonathan expect it. Instead, their friendship grew out of mutual understanding and shared history. She even joined him and the kids on a few outings, laughing alongside them at amusement parks or cheering during school events. Watching her interact with the Quadruplets reminded Jonathan of everything he had missed: the laughter, the chaos, the pure joy of family life. The children adored Emma, often asking when she'd visit again. "She's like the cool aunt we never knew we needed," Mia joked one day, making everyone laugh. For Jonathan, these moments were bittersweet. He couldn't undo the past, but seeing Emma bond with his kids gave him hope that redemption was possible. It wasn't about fixing what he had broken. It was about creating something new, something meaningful. As the years went by, Jonathan began teaching the Quadruplets lessons beyond academics and hobbies. He shared stories from his own life, both the successes and the failures, hoping to instill values of honesty, responsibility, and humility. One evening, gathered around the fireplace at Clara's house, he told them about the mistakes he had made as a younger man. "I thought money and success would make me happy," he confessed, looking at their wide-eyed faces. "But I was wrong. What truly matters is the people you care about, and how you treat them." The kids listened intently, absorbing every word. Later, as they drifted off to sleep, Jonathan sat quietly, reflecting on how far he had come. He wasn't the same man who had walked away from Emma or ignored the consequences of his actions. The guilt still lingered, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it served as a reminder of the importance of accountability and growth. His relationship with Sophia eventually came to an end. The distance between them had grown insurmountable, and neither fought to keep things together. While parting ways was painful, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where Jonathan prioritized authenticity over appearances. He sold the penthouse apartment, opting for a simpler lifestyle closer to Clara and the kids. The move symbolized his shift in perspective. True wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or luxury cars. It was found in relationships, love, and purpose. By embracing this mindset, Jonathan discovered a peace he hadn't known existed. The emptiness that once plagued him was replaced by fulfillment. Every hug from the Quadruplets, every smile from Emma, and every quiet moment of gratitude reinforced the idea that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. And for the first time in years, Jonathan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Years passed, and Jonathan's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The once restless man who chased excitement and wealth now found his greatest joy in the simplest moments. Watching Liam score a goal on the soccer field, hearing Mia explain her latest science project with uncontainable enthusiasm, or seeing Ava proudly display her newest painting. Even little Noah, the jokester of the group, brought laughter into Jonathan's days with his endless antics. These weren't just fleeting pleasures. They were the foundation of a life rich with meaning. Clara remained an integral part of their lives, always welcoming Jonathan into their home and working alongside him to ensure the Quadruplets grew up grounded and happy. Their co-parenting dynamic evolved into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Though romance was never part of the equation, their bond strengthened as they navigated parenting challenges together. Clara often joked that Jonathan had finally learned how to change diapers properly, but beneath her teasing tone was genuine appreciation for the effort he put into being present. Emma also stayed connected, becoming a cherished figure in the children's lives. She attended school plays, helped them with homework during visits, and offered advice when teenage drama inevitably arose. To the Quadruplets, she wasn't just Dad's friend. She was family. Her quiet strength and unwavering kindness inspired them, just as it had once inspired Jonathan. For him, having Emma back in his life, even as a friend, felt like another step toward healing the wounds of the past. As the kids grew older, they began asking more questions about their father's life before them. At first, Jonathan hesitated, unsure how much to share, but eventually he realized honesty was the best policy. He told them about his successes and failures, his mistakes, and the lessons he had learned along the way. One summer evening, sitting around a bonfire at Clara's backyard, he opened up about leaving Emma and the regret that followed. "I thought I wanted freedom," he explained, his voice steady despite the weight of the memory. "But what I really needed was connection, with people who mattered most. I hope you'll remember that when you face your own choices." The Quadruplets listened intently, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Later, Liam approached him and said, "Dad, we're glad you're here now. That's all that matters." It was a simple statement, but it carried immense power. In that moment, Jonathan knew he had earned their trust, not because he was perfect, but because he had tried. By the time the Quadruplets reached high school, they had blossomed into remarkable individuals. Liam became a star athlete, known not just for his skills, but for his leadership. Mia excelled in academics, earning awards for her scientific research. Ava's artwork gained recognition in local galleries, while Noah's humor and charisma made him beloved by everyone he met. Each of them carried pieces of Jonathan within them, their determination, creativity, and charm. But they also reflected the values instilled by Clara and Emma. Jonathan often marveled at how different his life had turned out compared to what he once envisioned. Success no longer meant boardroom victories or luxury penthouses. It meant seeing his children thrive, knowing he had played a role in shaping their futures. Even Sophia, though long gone from his life, occasionally crossed his mind. He hoped she had found happiness too, wherever her journey had taken her. Looking back on his life, Jonathan understood that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about learning from them and using those lessons to build something better. He had walked away from love twice. First with Emma, then with the family he didn't even know existed. Yet through humility, effort, and forgiveness, from others and himself, he had rebuilt bridges and created new ones. On a crisp autumn morning, years after that fateful day in the cafe, Jonathan stood on the porch of Clara's house, watching the quadruplets pile into a car for a road trip. They were heading to college tours, ready to explore the world beyond their small town. As they waved goodbye, Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't saying farewell. He was watching them spread their wings, armed with the love and guidance he had worked so hard to provide. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the warmth of family, Jonathan realized he had found true wealth, not in possessions, but in relationships. And as the car disappeared down